Today I'd like to talk about part 4 of a dialogue with Archbishop Gomez about his recent address. What he goes on to speak about in his talk is that today's critical theories and ideologies are profoundly atheistic. So his objection to the theories seems to be their atheism. But again, difficult to follow him exactly because, what critical theories is he referring to and what ideologies is he referring to? And the fact that they're atheistic, some theories, of course, might not involve God, but, they might be able to bring out certainly other points that we would like to dialogue about in terms of what the meaning that they're trying to establish. So the fact that they're atheistic or agnostic is not necessarily a disqualifier. Certainly as people of faith, we bring that faith element, but we certainly want to be in dialogue with those who might have a different perspective with regard to faith, but might want to talk to us about justice issues and certain ways of establishing equality and establishing more opportunity for people. So it would be important to take a look at them, whether they're atheistic or not atheistic, obviously. He says they reduce what it means to be human to essentially physical qualities. So I guess he's concerned that they really are just dealing with the physical, the material, and not the spiritual aspect of human life. And certainly some people might want to establish first, what is the physical aspect. If people don't have enough food, if they don't have proper housing, if they don't have good education, they might want to focus on those aspects. And we would certainly think it important to focus on those as well, but also then add the spiritual dimension, which from our perspective is certainly a very important quality in terms of human life as well. Then he says they seem to be coming from the same Marxist cultural vision as certain elements of liberation theology and resemble some of the heresies that we find in church history. So he talks about the Marxist aspect of some of these theories. Again, not naming the theories, it would be hard to say whether they are Marxist or not. Part of things that are labeled Marxist, of course, are those that have to deal with a class struggle. So if there is a struggle that goes on of a class that is impoverished or a class that does not have access to certain opportunities or a class that is not doing economically as well as another class, we might label that Marxist. But certainly that's not the only component to it. It's certainly, we have to look at other aspects to it, and those aspects might be more justice related. If there is this class division, if there is an economic division, if it is a persistent economic division, if there is some exploitation going on of a certain group of people, we would want to look at that not as a Marxist thing, but certainly as a question of justice. He talks about liberation theology, certain elements of liberation theology, again, not mentioning the elements, so difficult to discern. But liberation theology has many aspects to it. There are many liberation theologians, and the basic concept of liberation theology would be that we have an obligation to work for justice for those who are oppressed and to liberate the oppressed, to lead them to more freedom, to more economic freedom, educational freedom, freedom for better healthcare outcomes, those types of freedoms, freedom to have food and clothing, necessary elements in human life. And the heresies that we find in the early church, and Archbishop Gomez names those heresies. He says the Manichaeans heresy, and the Manichaeans, he specifically mentions the struggle between good and evil. And certainly the Manichaeans were noted for that, the forces of good versus evil. But other than Manichaeans, there certainly are those who would talk about those elements, good and evil. There is certainly good in our world. There are many good people that we encounter, but there's also evil. People who try to exploit others, who scam others, cheat others. and certainly that would be evil, and we should fight against that. Then he talks about the Gnostics, and he says they reject creation, they reject the body. The Gnostics, of course, were noted for kind of an elite group who thought that they knew more than everyone else, and so it might fit in with his Archbishop Gomez's category of the elite that he talked about earlier in his address, and the fact that these elite might want to control things, and certainly part of the struggle that we find for justice is, those who are in power maybe not willing to share that power or to help others to achieve a sense of equality. Then he talks about the Pelagian heresy, basically, which says that we can, accomplish our own redemption without God, and that would be consistent with what the Archbishop said about the atheists and those who are leaving religion out or attacking religion. And there might be those who feel that, but I think it's more what we're talking about here is the struggle for justice and not so much redemption. Redemption certainly and salvation refer specifically to religious concepts. And as we know, redemption, salvation is the gift of Jesus to us in terms of Catholic theology. And does the struggle for justice equate with the struggle for salvation? I think they are two somewhat related struggles, but different in terms of salvation, a kind of an ultimate sense of happiness and goodness. The idea of struggling for justice is that we can share what we have been given with and the beauties of creation and the gifts of creation with everyone in an equitable and fair manner. He talks about these movements, again, not naming the movements, but he just, these movements. He says they are utopian. They're trying to create a heaven on earth, a perfectly just society. And one can sympathize with that concept. Creating a perfectly just society is kind of a monumental task. We've seen many efforts to create a more just society, and the difficulty of that and enacting that. People have to agree, well, what is a just society? How do we accomplish it? How do we make it fair for everyone? I think people have a sense that they want to, help other people. If we see somebody that's hungry, we certainly want to feed them. If we see somebody that needs clothes, we want to share what we have with them. We have the desire to do that. And we have a desire to create a more just society. Will it ever be a perfectly just society? As human beings, we are imperfect. We tend to be selfish, self-centered. We have to try to overcome that. So again, that could be a difficult goal to attain, as the bishop points out. He says these movements deny the human person. And again, I think a lot of the movements for social justice, for change, for more equity in society, really don't deny the human person, but try to respect the dignity of the human person. So again, we would have to look at the specific movements that the Archbishop is trying to reference there. He says these social movements are causing new forms of social division, discrimination, intolerance, and injustice. So these new movements that the bishop does not name are causing more division in society. And certainly we can see that there is division. We can concede that in our society. Now, are the movements causing that division, or other conditions within society causing that division? So if someone does not have adequate health care and someone does, there is that division between someone who does have good health care, someone who doesn't. That is a division. Is that caused by the movements, or is that caused by something else? And is there a way to remedy that division by creating more justice and more equity? So that would be the question. And in terms of intolerance and injustice, these are things we certainly have to work against. They are present in our society. Did these movements cause them, or have they been there for rather a long time? Some would say since the very beginning of the country there has been injustice, there has been intolerance, there has been discrimination, and there has been division. So these are not new items that certainly appear because of certain movements, but they are realities that we have to try to work against and overcome by creating a society that is more just. The solution that he comes up with is that we need to proclaim Jesus Christ. And certainly the proclamation of Jesus is important because Jesus came to offer us salvation, to offer us a path to justice, to tell us to be more forgiving, to love our enemies, to share what we have with others. And when we share what we have with others, Jesus said we are sharing it with him. So certainly we can agree that we do need to not just proclaim Jesus, but we need also to follow his example and to act on the message of Jesus. And in our next video, we will look further at the Archbishop's reflections.